In the summer of 1858, the Thames smelled so badly that the House of Commons could not work. Members of Parliament soaked the curtains in chloride of lime and held handkerchiefs to their faces, and it was not enough. The river that ran past the windows was an open sewer, and in the June heat, the stench rising from it was so powerful that committees abandoned their rooms and serious consideration was given to moving Parliament out of London entirely. This was the Great Stink, and it achieved something that a decade of cholera epidemics, thousands of deaths, and the repeated warnings of doctors, engineers, and public health reformers had failed to achieve. It made the people who controlled the money care, because the smell had reached them personally. The story of the Great Stink is a story about infrastructure, specifically about what happens when a city grows faster than its systems, and about the price a population pays when the people in charge refuse to spend money on things they cannot see. London in 1858 had 3 million people. It had no integrated sewer system, and the river it depended on for drinking water was the same river into which it emptied its waste. Start with how London managed its sewage before the crisis, because the system was not primitive. It was wrong, and wrong in a specific way that made the problem worse as the city grew. London had sewers. They were old, some of them dated to the medieval period, and they were designed to carry rainwater, not human waste. For most of London's history, human waste went into cesspits, brick-lined holes beneath houses and courtyards, emptied by night soilmen who carried the contents away to be sold as fertilizer. The system was unpleasant but functional. It worked because the population was small enough and the surrounding farmland close enough that the waste could be absorbed. Two things changed in the early 19th century. The first was population. London roughly doubled between 1800 and 1850 from about 1 million to about 2.5 million. More people produced more waste, and the cesspits filled faster than they could be emptied. The second was the water closet, the flush toilet, which became widely available in the 1840s and was enthusiastically adopted by anyone who could afford one. A flush toilet is a magnificent piece of domestic engineering, but it has a consequence. Instead of depositing waste into a cesspit where it sits until someone removes it, it sends that waste in a large volume of water into the nearest drain. And the nearest drain led to the sewers, and the sewers led to the Thames. By the 1850s, the Thames was receiving the raw sewage of more than 2 million people, plus the waste of slaughterhouses, tanneries, dye works, breweries, and every other industry that found it convenient to discharge into the river. The same river supplied the drinking water for a substantial portion of London's population. The water companies drew their supply directly from the Thames, and several of them drew it from points downstream of the sewer outflows. Londoners were, in the most literal sense, drinking their own sewage. The result was cholera. The first major outbreak hit in 1831. The second, far worse, arrived in 1848 and killed more than 14,000 people in London alone. A third outbreak in 1853 killed more than 10,000. The disease was terrifying. A person could be healthy in the morning and dead by evening, killed by a diarrheal illness that drained the body of fluid with a speed that seemed almost mechanical. The medical establishment believed cholera was caused by miasma, bad air, poisonous vapors rising from rotting matter. This was wrong, but it was wrong in a way that was difficult to disprove without tools that did not yet exist. The miasma theory had the apparent support of common sense. The worst outbreaks occurred in the worst-smelling areas, and the disease seemed to follow filth. The connection between contaminated water and cholera had been demonstrated by John Snow in his famous investigation of the Broad Street pump in 1854, but Snow's work was not widely accepted by the medical profession during his lifetime. The establishment preferred its own theory, and the establishment controlled the institutions. What the miasma theory did accomplish, accidentally, was to create political support for cleaning up the Thames, not because the river was spreading disease through the water supply, which it was, but because it was spreading disease through the air, which it was not. The right thing was done for the wrong reason, which is how a surprising amount of public health progress has been made throughout history. But even the smell was not enough to force action until it reached Parliament. For years, engineers and reformers had proposed comprehensive sewer plans for London. The most persistent was Joseph Bazalgette, the chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works, who had been developing a plan to intercept the sewage before it reached the Thames and carry it in massive tunnels to outfalls far downstream, where it would be released on the ebb tide and carried out to sea. Bazalgette's plan was expensive. It would require 82 miles of new intercepting sewers, more than 1,000 miles of street sewers feeding into them, massive pumping stations, and embankments along the Thames to contain the infrastructure. The estimated cost was £3 million, an enormous sum in 1858, equivalent to several hundred million in today's money. The Metropolitan Board of Works hesitated. Parliament hesitated. Every proposal was debated, amended, rejected, reconsidered, and debated again, while the Thames grew worse and the death toll from waterborne disease continued to climb. The Great Stink broke the deadlock. In June 1858, after weeks of unusually hot weather, the smell from the river became physically unbearable across central London. The Times called it a pestilence and demanded action. Benjamin Disraeli, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, introduced a bill to fund Bazalgette's scheme. It passed through Parliament in 18 days, a speed that would have been inconceivable 6 months earlier, and received royal assent on the 2nd of August. Bazalgette began construction almost immediately, and the work took the better part of a decade. The scale was extraordinary. The northern low-level sewer ran from Hammersmith to Abbey Mills, passing beneath some of the most densely built parts of London. The southern system mirrored it on the opposite bank. The Victoria Embankment, which Londoners walk along today without thinking about what is underneath it, was built to contain the northern intercepting sewer and was one of the largest civil engineering projects in the world at the time. The pumping stations were engineering works of art. The Abbey Mills station in East London, which Bazalgette designed in a Byzantine style with ornamental ironwork and polished brass fittings, was called the Cathedral of Sewage by the newspapers. It was not a joke. Bazalgette believed that public infrastructure should be beautiful, because beauty was a way of telling the public that their money had been well spent, and because a city that hid its essential systems in ugly buildings was a city that did not respect the work those systems did. The system was largely complete by 1865, and the effect on public health was immediate and measurable. Cholera had killed thousands in every outbreak since 1831. After the new sewers began operating, cholera effectively disappeared from London. The last major outbreak, in 1866, was confined to areas of East London that had not yet been connected to the new system, a natural experiment that proved the link between sewage, water supply, and disease more conclusively than any laboratory could have managed. Basil Jetta had built the sewers with spare capacity. He calculated the diameter of each tunnel based on the population it would serve, and then made it larger, substantially larger, on the grounds that London would continue to grow and the sewers would need to handle more than current volumes. That decision, which cost more money at the time and was questioned by the accountants, is the reason the system still functions more than 160 years later. Engineers who build to the minimum specification build something that is obsolete before it is finished. Bazalgette built for the city London had not yet become, and the city caught up with him about a century later. The Great Stink is remembered as a joke. The summer London smelled so bad that Parliament ran away. But the story underneath the joke is one of the most important in British public health history. Tens of thousands of Londoners died of cholera because the people who controlled the money would not spend it on sewers. Tens of thousands more would have died if the smell had not, in the end, climbed through the windows of the House of Commons and made the problem personal. The infrastructure that saved them was expensive, and it was ugly, and it ran underground where nobody could see it, and it worked. That is the nature of good infrastructure. It is invisible when it works, and it kills people when it does not, and the people who pay for it rarely understand what they are paying for until the bill for not paying arrives.